Hi guys, it's Michelle, and today's video is going to be one of the most darkest true crime cases that I have ever come across, the 11-year-old serial killer. I told you guys on Twitter and on the YouTube community tab that I wanted to start getting more into like specific true crime cases because normally I just cover a bunch of unsolved cases like in one video. And I asked you guys which of the 3 super interesting cases that I researched you guys found the most interesting and would want to see first, and you guys voted for this one. Without further ado, let's get into the case of Mary Bell, the 11-year-old serial killer. So Mary Flora Bell was born on May 26th, 1957 in Newcastle, England. She definitely was not any average child. She had a lot of things going on at home. It was actually pretty terrible, her living conditions. Her mother, Betty, was 17 years old when she gave birth to Mary, and she was super absent in Mary's life. She was a prostitute, so she ended up out of town very often for work. This was actually super common in the area that Mary grew up in Scotswood, England. A lot of the mothers were prostitutes, a lot of the fathers were alcoholics, leaving the kids completely unsupervised for several hours of the day and night, which is obviously pretty concerning, even starting at the age of 3 years old, which is absolutely crazy. But a bunch of neighborhood kids like Mary were just kind of left alone to play in the neighborhood and hang out literally at all hours of the day and of all ages. It's not exactly known who Mary's biological father is, but her father figure that she grew up with was a man named Billy Bell who, like I said, was super absent, was an alcoholic, and generally was a pretty habitual criminal, committing a lot of armed robberies. Mary was already a baby when Billy and her mother Betty got married, so it's kind of unlikely that Billy is the actual biological father of Mary Bell, but no one is really sure. So Mary Bell grew up under very unfortunate circumstances. Like we said, she was pretty much neglected as a child, but when her parents were there, it wasn't great either. There have been several separate claims from different family members claiming that Betty actually tried to kill Mary when she was a child and make it look like an accident. Her family became super suspicious when Mary fell from a 2-story window. However, a lot of her family members believe that her mother, Betty, pushed her. According to many other family members, Betty would claim that Mary would accidentally consume sleeping pills, even though other family members claim that they saw Betty giving Mary the sleeping pills and telling her that they were candy. Betty also apparently tried to give Mary up for adoption several times, which is super odd because when her family, like her own family, would offer to take Mary off of her hands, she refused. I think it's also pretty important to note that when Mary fell from this window, she actually suffered some really critical brain damage. Mary actually had damage to her prefrontal cortex, which is an area of the brain associated with voluntary movements and decision making. So I feel like that's kind of important to know when looking into the things that she would do in her future. It's just interesting to look at because a lot of the time when we talk about these serial killers, we look into their past, and most of them have had pretty traumatic childhoods, and Mary Bell was no different. Entering into the elementary school age, Mary Bell ended up having very violent tendencies. In a 1998 documentary that was released, a couple of Mary Bell's classmates actually spoke out about how they felt their experiences were with Mary Bell and how she was as a child, and it's pretty dark.
I was frightened of her, so what you did was you kept away from her. You had to be very careful of her.
They talked about how Mary Bell was just basically a terrifying child. She would strangle the other kids in the class, and she was just always very scary to be around. The kids were very terrified of her, and the teachers were aware of her violent tendencies but essentially did nothing. So Mary Bell ended up having a partner in crime. Her name was Norma Bell. They were actually not related despite the same last name, but Norma Bell was 13 years old. She was a bit slow, they would describe her in the documentary. I thought that the way that they were kind of describing her was a little mean because they kept saying she was simple-minded and just like, it kind of made it seem like she had a disability that no one was aware of, but also this was 1998, so. Like I said, Norma was essentially Mary's partner in crime, and all of the school kids were terrified of the two of them. On May 11th of 1968, Mary and Norma actually took this little boy who was 3 years old to go get candy. Well, a couple hours later, he was found just wandering the streets, confused and just bleeding. This incident was reported, but no action was taken against the girls. The next day, an incident ended up happening at the park where Mary and Norma strangled this little girl, Pauline, and poured sand from the sandbox into her mouth, and It's just so messed up. Pauline talked about it in the documentary and it just sounded so scary, but Pauline even said herself that she thought that Norma was just scared as well, and it was mostly Mary who was in control. On May 25th, 1968, the day before her 11th birthday, Mary strangled a little boy named Martin Bell in an abandoned house. It was pretty common to have these like abandoned buildings around their area of Scotswood, and basically the kids would go around and play in there all the time. So when the police found this little boy's body here, they actually ended up ruling his death natural causes because they couldn't find any evidence on the body that if he was murdered or strangled or anything, which is really scary because obviously like kids like Mary Bell can't put that much pressure, that ended up making it like into the autopsy, and it's just really fucked up. 2 days later, Mary and Norma actually broke into and vandalized a nursery. They like completely destroyed the place, and they left notes claiming responsibility for Martin Brown's death. They left 4 pieces of paper that said, quote, "I murder so I may come back. We murder, watch out. And we did murder Martin Brown. Fuck off, you bastard." So the police ended up actually ignoring this because they thought it was just a prank of some children getting into some mischief, basically, which is really sad because at that point they didn't even realize that Martin Brown had been murdered. Like I said, his death was ruled natural causes. On July 31st of 1968, Mary and Norma strangled a little 3-year-old boy named Brian Howe. They used scissors to carve an M into the little boy's stomach and cut his hair, and also scratched up his legs with the same scissors, and they ultimately just left his body in a wasteland. After this happened, police started to look at the similarities between Brian Howe and Martin Brown and ended up determining that the 2 cases were perpetuated by the same killer. So not only was Martin Brown's death now ruled a murder, but it also meant that there was a killer on the loose. The medical examiner actually suspected that the criminal was a child because relatively little force was used when strangling these kids. So this ultimately led police to question children in the area. Mary and Norma kept giving very inconsistent answers to their questions, and ultimately police began to be pretty suspicious of them. And on August 8th of 1968, they ended up both getting charged for the murder of Brian Howe. Mary tried to blame the killings on an older boy, while Norma ended up breaking down and blaming Mary. So the case ended up going to trial in December of 1968, and Norma actually claimed that she told Mary to stop hurting Brian Howe. And Norma was ultimately acquitted for her roles in the killing because she was simple-minded, like I said before. Mary, on the other hand, was convicted of manslaughter, and the reason that this happened was because Mary had seen several psychiatrists in between August and December when she was, first accused and when she got convicted. And all of these psychiatrists came to the conclusion that she was actually a psychopath. By like definition, they claimed that she had no emotions or no empathy and no feelings overall, and would keep pushing the blame on other people for the deaths of these children that she obviously committed. And that's why she was convicted of manslaughter and not first-degree murder, because the jury ended up deciding that she was by definition a psychopath. The jury also claimed that they believed that Mary Bell did still pose as a grave danger to other children. It was kind of confusing because they didn't really know what to do with Mary Bell, because they wanted to detain her in a psychiatric center, but they couldn't because of her age. So they basically sent her to kind of a boarding school. It was very secure. It wasn't like freaking PCA or anything, but it was very much a very secure boarding school, but it also was very much not prison because she was 11 years old. So she actually spent 6 years at Red Bank before they transferred her to an open prison called Moore Court, and she ended up escaping this prison in 1977 for 2 days, and then she was moved to another prison in 1978, and then 2 years later she was released at the age of 23 years old as a free woman. I think kind of scary, because I think the way that she worded the notes that she wrote, the way that she denied everything, the way that psychiatrists evaluated her, I think that she was dangerous. Is she dangerous as an adult? I don't know, but I don't know. I just thought it was pretty crazy that she was released at such a young age after literally murdering 2 people. And now to this day, by law, her identity is protected. So this woman is still out there. She is still alive. And not only that, but she actually had a kid 4 years after she was released from prison. On May 25th of 1984, ironically, exactly 16 years to the day of her first murder, she gave birth to a baby girl. And this child grew up to apparently not know who her mother really is. Not in the sense of, like, she knows who Mary Bell is, but, like, doesn't know what Mary Bell did because of the way that Mary Bell's identity has been protected. The kid probably knows now, just because she's obviously an adult. In 2009, she actually gave birth to her own child. So that makes, you know, Mary Bell a grandmother, and that grandchild's identity is also protected. So it's pretty interesting, but I feel like she would have to know as an adult, because something about Mary Bell was super identifiable in the way that she looked, like her blue eyes. Like, I guess she could get colored contacts, but I don't know. That would just be crazy. Like, imagine finding that out, like, when you're, you know, 20 years old or something. Do you guys think that she should have been released from prison just because her crimes were committed at such a young age? I do think that she obviously had a very horrible, horrible childhood. I still obviously don't think that's an excuse to murder people. But either way, do you believe that Mary Bell deserved the second chance in life that she got? It's super interesting that she is still out there and nobody knows where she is. What do you guys think about this case? But that is it for today's video. If you guys liked it, please give it a big thumbs up. Let me know in the comments below your opinions on this case. And also, if you have any other true crime cases that you want me to cover, let me know below. But that is it. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram, because I'm always posting really dope ass shit on there. Subscribe for new videos every week, and I will see you guys later. Bye!